I know that we're over time, folks, and completely understand that some of you may need to leave at this point, and that's okay. But I do want to invite any questions, comments, things that have come up for you over the last little while that you would just like to see addressed or answered. Unfortunately, Dr. Kochak had to leave. She had another meeting. So if you do have any questions for her, pop them into the chat and I will email, and all of that kind of thing can happen. So if you do want that question specifically addressed by Dr. Kochak, add your question and an email address, or you can send that to me directly. That's no problem. We've had a request for Dr. Smith, your contact information into the chat. If you don't mind popping that in there, that would be great. Thank you very much. Any other questions out there for folks? All right. How do you get tested for long COVID if you think someone you know might have it? Is there a test? All right. From all of our panelists, is there someone that wants to field that? Jessica, I see you unmuted.
Yeah,
off you go.
I can speak to that. There isn't one test that's going to happen, right? So it's basically you meet that criteria of what our working diagnosis is. So you've had a COVID test, a positive COVID test, or a probable, because we all know that there have been times that early in the pandemic, in January, and now where testing is not readily available. There's no PCR testing. Rapid tests are questionable. And so what will happen is based on ongoing symptoms related to that infection. So it can't be attributed to something else, right? You don't have another comorbidity going on that could also explain those symptoms. Then basically you will be dealing with post-COVID conditions. So there's not a single test that you can do. Now, within that, there are other things that can be tested. If you're experiencing respiratory symptoms, then they'll go down the respiratory tract. If you're experiencing cardiac symptoms, they'll go down that track. And further on as you get into different comorbidities associated with it.
Okay, thanks so much, Jessica. I hope that answered your question, Gloria. Are there any other questions out there? Put them in the chat, raise your hand along the bottom of the Zoom bar. If you go to reactions, there's a little button along the bottom there where you can raise your hand and it'll look just like that.
I actually have a question for Tim, if he's still there. I see him. And I kind of put it in the chat box, but during your presentation, Tim, you were talking about difficulties in reporting on long COVID coming to disability and how doctors are overworked and are struggling to fill out forms. Is there a movement in the insurance industry to then look at allied health professionals, so physiotherapists, occupational therapists, whatnot, to be able to fill out that reporting for you? Because we know that there's limited objective measures, right? So we've said this, that people will have symptoms and our traditional tests right now are not sensitive enough to find out something that can correlate with that. Yet when we look at the other allied health practitioners, we spend a lot of time with people and we can get a lot of information on their quality of life and function. And that may be a way forward to create better management maybe of these individuals.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's a great question. Actually, some insurers, specific to their contract, so in insurance, the larger the client, the more the risk is with the employer. So they allow different rules in administration. So there are some clients that actually have moved that way already and are more progressive, just for the reason that you said. But that would be the firm that may have more of the pricing based on their own claims. So they're more accountable, we call it. In the smaller clients where it's true insurance, the insurance industry still fairly much relies on a GP, right? And then associate to get the appeal a specialist. So again, be specific to the company and the contract that they had to the way that carrier may adjudicate. But I would tell you that it is still more the majority that lean to the GP or the specialist than the route that it makes more sense these days. But I think, again, you can move that way if you push your carrier more, but I don't know how quick it will be dependent on the client. That's the scary thing. You can talk to somebody and they're treated differently than somebody else with the same carrier because they have a different contract. The other thing I didn't get into was definition of disability, which can be different in the contracts too, right? So it gets more complex depending on the own occupation definition versus the length of that definition or in any occupation definition. So I can't give broad-based terms there because you'll really need to look at the individual contract that employer has in place. The rule, just to answer it in one thing, is I believe that carriers, for the right people, care more. You have to get the information out. Is it going to change everything? No, but it can help push it along.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions in the chat. So Cara, I'm going to go over to the chat for one and then come back to you. Okay. So the first question in the chat comes from Winnipeg. And this person is wondering, Jessica, is there a list of physio providers who are familiar with the information that you've presented? They are looking for someone in Winnipeg. So
yeah, unfortunately, we don't have that list. And the difficulty is, I would love to be able to do that, is that we would have to somehow vet them, and according to what criteria that we would know that they would be knowledgeable. I guess my biggest thing is that if you visit a physiotherapist and they don't seem to be aware of long COVID, or they're going to push exercise on you, they probably are not up to date on COVID, on long COVID, because we know that exercise can be harmful in a large proportion of individuals experiencing ongoing symptoms and disability. So unfortunately, right now, we don't have a way to create a list.
Okay, thanks so much, Jessica. Cara, over to you.
Hi. I was just wondering if any of the speakers have come across this situation yet. It just recently came up for myself and another colleague. Has there been any accommodations with licensing bodies for professions like physiotherapy or for nursing? Because for those of us that have been sick since the beginning, you have to keep up so many hours to keep your license within a 5-year period. And so even though we might be getting well enough to try a graduated return to work, we may end up losing our licenses because we've been off for so long. And I was just wondering if anybody had dealt with that yet with accommodations.
Anyone out there want to jump in? Cara, that may be a no for you. It sounds, the silence makes me think it's a no.
For us to start exploring that I certainly hadn't thought of yet. Just sort of came up yesterday. So, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. That's really great food for thought and a seed to plant for all of these incredible professionals that we have with us here today. There's another question in the chat here that I'd just like to call out, that's asking, what is the role for occupational therapists in post-COVID return to work?
I guess that'll come back to me again. And I think, I have been working with OTs as well. And I know that certainly in Alberta, the Workers' Compensation Board has OTs working. So they absolutely would have a role, as long as, I would say, that have upskilled their knowledge into long COVID and post-viral illness and ME CFS. So if you are knowledgeable in that, then you're going to be able to assist people with what they might need to help them attempt to return to work. But if you don't have that information, again, that's the same thing as if you go to your health professional that doesn't seem to be clear and up to date on the most, up to date evidence that we have on it, then it could potentially be harmful.
Okay.
I realize I'm the moderator, but I'm also an occupational therapist, so maybe I can just talk about that as well. Yeah, some large insurance providers do have, like Workers' Compensation Board, do have occupational therapists on staff. And as Jessica's saying, you know, it's important for the occupational therapist to have increasing knowledge about long COVID, as well as episodic disabilities in general, because it is about balancing not just work, but people's everyday lives in terms of taking care of themselves, parenting, looking after their families, having friends and families. It's a large picture, and occupational therapists can certainly help with that understanding around how those balances happen when someone is experiencing long COVID. Yeah, so, and I would also encourage, like, because some insurance providers require the physician's assessment, but I would also encourage people to encourage their family doctors or whoever to also make referrals to allied health professionals like physiotherapists and occupational therapists to help to inform what their requirements might be about return to work and accommodations.
Thank you, Gail. Appreciate you stepping in there, doing double duty. I am seeing a really rich conversation happening in the chat. So if you have a second, have a look over there. And there's one last question that I think we've got time for, and it is, how can someone prove they got COVID at the workplace and not outside of the workplace? Yes, Dr. Smith, off you go.
So it's challenging in terms of the risk of contracting COVID is sort of continuous across settings. So there are, if we're thinking about a workers' compensation setting, there are particular rules that apply, which are sort of outlined. So I had in the chat box an FAQ on how the WSIB adjudicates COVID-19 claims and determines if they're work-related or not. There's also, I mean, sometimes the claims are fairly simple because the person has been involved in a workplace outbreak, which again has a separate set of criteria for when does a workplace outbreak get stated in terms of happening in the workplace. So that work-related component, if it is work-related and it's adjudicated to be work-related, I think one of the benefits of going through the WSIB system is things around loss of earnings, a little bit more intensity in terms of the interactions between the workplace and the worker. So if you feel like it is, and there's, as I said, information on the WSIB's webpage, and there is information on a lot of the other compensation agency web pages, which are all provincial in Ontario. You can go on there, and if you feel like you've contracted COVID at work, you can submit a claim, which will be adjudicated to determine if it's work-related or not.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for all of their participation and for the excellent commentary and resources that are being posted in the chat. To close us out today, I'm going to hand back over to Gail.
So thank you so much, everybody, and all of the speakers. I'm wondering if we could just give a collective virtual clap to all of our speakers today. It's always awkward on Zoom because we don't get the kind of thunderous applause that we do when we're doing these kinds of things in person. So just want to acknowledge all of the speakers and thank them for being with us today.